Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. This is video number 6 in our current ongoing series on why N.T. Wright is wrong in regard to the redemption of creation. As I have stated before, I have tremendous respect for much of what N.T. Wright teaches. I can't say that I have all of his books, but I certainly have a lot of them. And I just enjoy that. I particularly enjoy his historical insights, his historical knowledge of what the German scholars called the Zeitsleben, the life situation of the first century Jews, of the world in which Jesus came. His insights are just so helpful and insightful. So what I am doing here is certainly not to impugn his overall scholarship. I do disagree with his theology a great deal. I certainly disagree with his eschatology, and that's the purpose of this series of videos. We are focused on his view that there will come a time in the not too distant future, well, I should amend that, I suppose, because he never actually sets any kind of temporal context or framework for the arrival of the new creation, for the redemption of creation. But the core belief of N.T. Wright is expressed in his book, Paul, on page 131, in which he shares with us the Jewish view in the first century and for a few centuries prior to that about what would happen in the kingdom. And he says their view was that when God finally acts, this will, of course, constitute a new creation. The myrtle, a plant, will come up in place of the briar, the cypress instead of the thorns. In other words, Genesis 3 will be reversed as God's word comes from heaven to recreate the earth. The human one, and of course that's Christ, will be exalted over the beast. In other words, Genesis 2 is to come true on a cosmic and global scale, establishing God's sovereignty through faithful Israel over the whole world. So it's more than obvious that for N.T. Wright, the redemption of creation involves not just sentient creation, but it involves at least the plants. And if you're going to talk about the redemption of the entire created order, as he does, then you are on the path to take the view expressed by Richard Middleton in his book, A New Heaven and a New Earth, in which he says, God's saving activity, as he depicts it in 2 Peter chapter 3, is pictured as renewal, implied by the twofold use of the word new, and this is applied to the entire created universe. In other words, new heavens and new earth, which will be characterized by righteousness. Like the other 4 texts, and he's examined Romans 8 in that, salvation is here understood as comprehensive and holistic, bringing transformation and newness to the entire created order of heaven and earth. Well, pardon me. It's more than obvious, then, that Middleton and Wright are on the same page in assuming and positing a yet future time in which, as Middleton expresses it, and as Wright expresses it, the entire created order will be renewed. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if, as Wright expresses it, if plants are going to be renewed, restored, recreated, then that means that bugs, slugs, and mosquitoes are likewise going to be recreated, restored, redeemed. And that means that Romans chapter 8, which speaks about the redemption of creation as the manifestation of the sons of God, it means that, plants, bugs, slugs, and mosquitoes will be manifested as the sons of God. I'm sorry, that's just what the text says. The whole creation was eagerly awaiting, and remember, Do not forget this. And this is what N.T. Wright completely and totally ignores in his discourse on Romans 8. Romans 8 is posited in a context of tremendous imminence. Now, I hinted at a hermeneutical principle that I believe is valid. Admittedly, it's not found explicitly in the lexicons, but here's the point that I wanted to make that I did not fully flesh out. And that is the Greek word mello, as the Blas de Brunner Greek grammar points out, mello, malign, with the infinitive, which is malign, indicates imminence. Now, a lot of people try to argue against that, and they say that, well, mello simply means certain to occur. And it can certainly, pun intended, indicate certainty, but there is no justification for making a blanket statement of any kind that mello with the infinitive does not indicate imminence. And here's the principle that I want you to ponder and think about. I propose and I suggest and I believe anytime you find mello in the infinitive used with other words of imminence, that those other words of imminence emphasize and magnify the inherent imminence found in mello. And thus, when, as N.T. Wright's own translation of Romans 8:18 and following says, the whole creation is on the tiptoe of eager expectation, looking for the manifestation of the sons of God, i.e. the redemption. And so you have two extremely powerful words of imminence used with mello. And again, I suggest that demands that the imminence that is inherent in mello, and by the way, virtually every single Greek lexicon admits and states that mello, the primary meaning means about to be on the point of. So the primary meaning of mello indicates imminence. Thus, once again, to reiterate, when mello is used with other words of imminence, then that basic primary fundamental meaning of about to be on the point of, is brought to the surface and it is enhanced and emphasized. But I have to move on. Part of N.T. Wright's view of the redemption of creation, and this is really interesting to me. N.T. Wright must believe that physical creation, and it's indicated in the quote from his book on Paul that I stated, in which he believes that the curse of the ground that said that Adam would work by the sweat of his brow and produce his fruit amidst the thorns and the thistles, N.T. Wright says that curse is still going on right now. Now, I've posed a question to you, ladies and gentlemen. It is a question that I do not see N.T. Wright, I do not see any other commentators who believe in a yet future redemption of, quote, creation, unquote, fully address. And the question is, in what way can it be demonstrated that rocks, part of the entire created order, how do you make a rock better? Do you make it softer? And how do you make trees, how do you make a sunset any more beautiful? How do you make a sunrise any more beautiful? David said in the Psalms, the heavens declare your glory, and the firmament shows forth your handiwork. David expressed not one word. Now, the sunrises and the sunsets and the complexity of the stars, when I behold the sun, the moon, and the stars, and say, what is man that you are mindful of him? David was expressing awe at the beauty and the glory and the design of creation. Not one time did he say, well, you know, it's pretty good, but it's going to get better. Furthermore, we have to consider the fact, as this book that I have mentioned to you already, by John Garvey, he does some really good exegetical work, some great linguistic studies in this book. His book is God's Good Earth. It is Garvey's view, and mine as well, that natural creation, you know, part of the entire created order, is not under a physical or a curse insofar as any kind of a physical curse or spiritual curse either. And he concludes on page 23, or 25, excuse me. The implication, and drawing on what he's just presented, which is really good, by the way, must be that mankind has no innate immortality, but only that granted by God. And in fact, assuming the tree of life to be at least partly metaphorical, eternal life is gained only in communion with God, the very thing broken by Adam's disobedience. Now, I might nitpick ultra super tiny a bit there, but I'm not going to stop. Humanity then was created mortal, but may overcome death through relationship with God. Well, this gets back to the idea, okay, if man was created mortal, that means that when he sinned, he didn't become mortal. When he sinned, he didn't become subject to death, because if he was created mortal, he was always subject to death. Physical mortality was not the curse placed on Adam. And by the way, N.T. Wright agrees with this. So let me continue. There are no grounds whatsoever then in Genesis 2-3 for suggesting that any creature other than Adam and Eve ever had exemption from natural death, nor was threatened with death together with Adam, nor incurred that penalty along with them. Mortality was their natural state, as we shall see below. The New Testament goes along with this in speaking only of the resurrection of human beings to new life in the age to come. Now, make no mistake, he is a full-blown futurist. I certainly disagree with his view of biological resurrection. Because consider this, since mortality was not the penalty for sin, and even as he indicates in the book, that the penalty for sin was loss of spiritual life, I mean, that's what he says. It's loss of spiritual relationship with God. Okay, since sin did not bring mortality, physical mortality, but sin brought separation from God, then forgiveness restores what was lost. It does not restore human biological life. It restores spiritual fellowship between God and man. Now, when we come to Romans chapter 8, N.T. Wright takes it for granted, as does Middleton and other commentators. Most post-millennialists, by the way, Kim Riddlebarger, also an amillennialist, who takes the view that we're looking for this recreated order. But the key to their doctrine is the Greek word ktisis, translated as creation or creature. Let me read to you Romans 8:19 and following to show you how vital it is for us to properly understand the proper definition of creature, or the Greek word ktisis. For the earnest expectation of the creation, ktisis, eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. Now, whatever creation is, it wants to be sons of God. Creation eagerly awaits the manifestation of the sons of God. For the creation, ktisis, that's twice so far, was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. Because the creation itself, third mention, also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption, from the Greek word phathora, into the glorious liberty of the children of God. See, this creation, whatever it is going to be delivered into sonship. Sonship, i.e. becoming sons of God. So once again, are bugs, slugs, and mosquitoes part of that entire created order? Are bugs, slugs, and mosquitoes going to become sons of God? For we know that the whole creation, ktisis, 4 times, ladies and gentlemen, Paul uses the word ktisis in this passage. Now, obviously, ktisis in this passage is the core. It's the foundation of Paul's expectation. So, how in the world do we define ktisis? Now, make no mistake, all right? I want to be very clear on this. There's no question whatsoever that ktisis can be used of natural material creation. In Romans chapter 1, same book, Paul condemned the Gentiles who worshiped and served the creation, the created order, if you please, rather than the creator. And he's speaking of idolatry. The pagan nations around Israel were characterized by one word, idolaters. And here Paul in Romans chapter 1 castigates and condemns them because they worshiped the creation. And we know, you go all the way back in Israel's history, and you see that the nations surrounding Israel, the nations that were in the land of Canaan, they worshiped Ashtaroth, Moloch, Baal, and the entire pantheon of Baal worship, which involved, by the way, such things as worshiping mice. Boy, let's sign up for that, right? Right, ladies? Ezekiel chapter 8. They were worshiping Tammuz in the temple at Jerusalem. And Tammuz involved the worship of mice. The Egyptians worshipped, the Nile, and alligators, and baboons, and cats, and on and on and on. They worshiped the creation more than the creator. So it's not a question of whether or not the word ktisis can mean natural order, natural created order, or to use the terminology, the entire created order. But you see, if we're going to take that view, then let me reiterate, we have to agree and admit that Paul was speaking of a yet future time in which bugs, slugs, and mosquitoes, in which baboons, mice, roaches, on and on, all natural created order will become sons of God. Now, I believe when we look closer at Paul's doctrine of creation and redemption, that we're given direct insight into what he means. And I believe that when we look at what Jesus taught, Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Ktisis. He that believes, now wait a minute, preach the gospel to every creature. Ktisis. He that believes and is baptized shall be saved. He that does not believe, now obviously and undeniably, ktisis here, and keep in mind, this is every creature. So if creation involves non-sentient or even living animals, then Jesus puts the responsibility of believing and obedience to Christ in baptism as a necessity. If creation, if every creature, in the Greek it's every creature, all creation. If they don't believe, and let's face it, believing, i.e. faith, is an act of sentient response, willful response, purposeful response. And without that faith, there is no pleasing to God. And according to the text of Mark 16, there is no salvation. In other words, there's no redemption. He that does not believe shall be condemned. Does that not tell us that creation involves sentient, human thought, response, and not rocks and trees and myrtles and reeds? Likewise, Paul in Colossians chapter 1 and verse 23, Paul said that the gospel had been preached to every creature under heaven. Now look, I'm sorry, the Greek of the text is really emphatic. It's really powerful, and it's also undeniable. Now, there are some apocrypha, and it's little reason why they were apocrypha, works in which, one of the apostles encountered a 17-foot tall lion. And he preached the gospel to him. And that lion obeyed the gospel. 17 foot tall. Yeah. Oh my. Seriously? We're supposed to take this seriously? Well, you know what? If every creature under heaven had heard the gospel, then maybe that story is true. But, you and I as logical, thinking human beings, we know experientially, we just simply know cognitively that is not true. The point being here, ladies and gentlemen, that in Jesus' definition of creature, in Paul's definition of creature, and by the way, Paul talks about how the gospel had been preached to and was bringing forth fruit in the whole world, cosmos, Colossians 1, 5-7. What kind of fruit was it bringing forth? Cognitive, willful belief on the part of the creation that heard the gospel. No, ladies and gentlemen, nowhere in Scripture do we find any indication that any apostles or that Jesus ever preached the gospel to any aspect to the natural order. Now, Luke chapter 13, or Matthew, 20 and 21, Jesus is walking by a fig tree that had all indications of a fruit-bearing tree, and it didn't do it. And so he cursed it. Next day it was withered away. But that says absolutely nothing whatsoever about the creation or the natural, non-sentient, material creation. He certainly wasn't putting any kind of a curse on the rest of the world. Now, in what follows in next week's video, and here is your homework, okay? I want you to read, think about, ponder Isaiah chapter 26. Now, I could focus in on just a few verses there, but I want you to read the entire context and compare it with Romans chapter 8. In that text, you're going to see the concept of childbirth. Oh, just like Romans 8. You're going to see the concept of laboring in futility. Oh, just like in Romans chapter 8. And you're going to see the promise of redemption, just like in Romans chapter 8. Thank you for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. I hope that we've laid the groundwork for understanding the proper definition of the ktisis, the creation, that was eagerly groaning for, that was standing on the tiptoe of eager expectation of the redemption of creation. And I hope you can see it had nothing to do with bugs, slugs, and mosquitoes. Thanks again for joining me. Have a fantastic weekend. Please be safe. I'll see you on Monday.